Hey there, folks. Welcome back to the Philanthropy Mastermind series. If you notice something here different in the background, that's not by design, but by prodding from our producer, Jack Frost, who decided that I should show you what things are like as we transition our set and undergo a major renovation here. So if you'd like to post guesses about what is going on in my background, we'll take those in the chat along with all of your hellos and maybe where you're from and which organization you're with, which part of the country or the world. We would love to hear all of that from you today. Of course, my name is Jay Frost. I'm the host of this series, which is, of course, sponsored by our friends at DonorSearch. And we won't be talking much about DonorSearch today unless, of course, our presenter decides to mention them in the context of her talk. But that doesn't mean that we don't want you to learn about them. And in fact, you can not only learn about all their work to understand who our donors are and really what they're all about, as well as learn more about this series, look at past presentations, all the recordings of those, listen to our podcast, and check out our future presentations, all available to you at donorsearch.net. And so do check that out afterwards if you would. And I'm noticing now as I blather on that so many of you are saying hello and telling us where you're from and which organizations you're with. And we absolutely love that. Thank you so much for taking that on and warming up the chat. That is your place to play. It's also a place from which we'll be drawing questions and comments throughout. So please continue to use that. We also have the Q&A if you like to go the traditional route. And that's a great place for you to also post questions. We'll be monitoring that throughout today. So now, of course, what are you here for? Well, I hope you're here for talk about policies and procedures and getting some CFRA credit in the process. And that's the who, what, when, where, why, and how of those things and why they're so meaningful to us. And we have the right person to talk about that with you today. And that is, of course, Kelley McGeehan. And Kelley is a veteran in this field. She's worked in all different ends of development. From today, her work as principal consultant at her firm, Conduit Philanthropic Intelligence Partner, what she's been doing in the Baltimore area since 2011, but serving clients all over the place. And if you go back a few years, she's been in higher ed, and independent schools, and the community foundation world in a variety of roles, from director of development or assistant director of development, I should say, director of major gifts, campaign director, and gift planning. So if somebody understands not only why this is important, but actually how to implement it in a variety of contexts, that would be our friend Kelley McGeehan. So Kelley, thank you so much for hanging out today and sharing a little bit with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Kelley, I'll let you take it away, and we'll be here and ready to field questions as you jump in.
Okay, I am going to switch to sharing my screen here. And let me just get this up and running, and we're going to start the slideshow. Okay, thank you everyone for being here today to talk about this wonderful topic. And I'm sure there are myriad of reasons why you've chosen to join us today, whether you get really excited about policies and procedures as I do, whether you recognize that it's something that you absolutely have to have and are struggling to get started as far as where to start. You might even be sitting there saying, you know what, we have some policies and procedures in place, but I'd really like to freshen them up and get some new ideas. So hopefully, throughout the talk today, you will have some insights, some learning, and have some opportunity to ask some questions. So as Jay mentioned, I am Kelley McGeehan, and with Conduit Philanthropic Intelligence Partner. I started my business in 2011. I work with nonprofit organizations across the country. And as Jay had mentioned also, prior to that, I was a frontline fundraiser, really doing everything from soup to nuts with small local, regional, national, and international organizations. And I just realized that I was getting ahead of myself on that very first slide when I said that I dated the presentation for tomorrow for the 19th. It's almost like Groundhog Day. I'm going on vacation tomorrow, so I think I was getting ahead of myself and wanting it to already be there, already be in the Pacific Northwest. But enough about me. Let's dive into the subject that we have. So I wanted to first touch on our agenda and how I'm going to approach this subject with you today. I'm approaching it from the ideas of know, feel, and do. So when we're talking about policies and procedures, and within this presentation, I want you to be able to identify and develop policies and procedures after this conversation. And I want you to feel inspired to create or enhance what you have within your organization and to be able to do the work based on what is shared today. And I think that another key point with policies and procedures, and we'll get into this a little bit more later on in the presentation, there's not a one size fits all for policies and procedures for organizations. We have all sorts of needs and for our different organizations. And so we can modify what we're going to be talking about today to meet the individual needs for each of your organizations. So let's just set the stage and get, back to the basics and defining what prospect research policies and procedures are. So policy, it's a system of guidelines. It is to direct our decisions and our actions, or as some people say, a statement of intent. The procedures implement the policies that are created. And the procedures are the sets of instructions. It's kind of like IKEA. You've got the pictures, you've got a couple of words, not too many words, but a couple of words. But it's a series of steps and actions that are conducted in a specific manner. And it's a tried and true process. It's something that has been tested. It is something that has been vetted, discussed, and we have all of those steps in place. So the procedures are the worker bee steps. The policies are the overarching ideas. One key piece here is that the policies with the overarching ideas and guidelines that are directing our decisions, this is super important. They are not stagnant. They are going to grow, morph, and change and need to be fluid enough to meet growing and changing needs of your organization. It doesn't mean that you want to just willy-nilly be changing out your policies on a regular basis. There's a fine line between that and having the policies be so rigid that you cannot make any changes. And as I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about some specific examples, but general ideas, because every organization has different needs for these policies and procedures. So where do we start with our policies and procedures? The manual. Now, when I talk about the manual, I am talking about a compilation of all of our policies, all of our procedures in one location. Now, as Jay mentioned, I've had my business for the last 13 years. I was a frontline fundraiser for many years before that. So I tend to go old school and talk about paper. And I think in terms of paper with the manual. But the reality is, it doesn't matter if our manual is physical, it doesn't matter if it's electronic. What matters is it is in a neat and organized setup that is easily accessible for your team, for the members of your organization who need to be able to access it. The purpose of the manual and what makes it so important is that it creates efficiencies within the working environment of your organization. You never know when a member of your team, or if you're lucky and work for a larger institution and have many members of the team performing similar or the same work, you never know when things are going to shift. When somebody chooses to have a lifestyle change, when somebody wins the lottery, and they are no longer with your organization. You want to be able to have a mechanism to easily bring into place another employee to be able to facilitate the workflow. And so these policies and procedures are key to being efficient and onboarding somebody extremely quickly. It also helps for a reference point when there's some conversation about different ways that one part of the team or another part of the team wants to do some work, whether it is the level of research that they want, whether it's how a portfolio review session is handled, having the policies and procedures, having that manual reviewed and up to date and in one place that everyone can access. It eliminates the unnecessary conversations when you can simply point at what have been the agreed upon manner of working within your organization, and you can go about the work at hand. Now, here's a really important piece. When we talk manuals, and I know I have run into this myself and with many organizations that I've worked with when we have been creating these policies and procedures. You think manual, you start thinking these large books that are pictured on the slide, and it gets overwhelming. Think about, wow, I've got all this other work that I need to do. I have deadlines for research. I've got to review portfolios. I have to do database maintenance. I have to get out and meet with my constituents if I'm the relationship manager. Don't worry about having every single policy and procedure created when you want to start or update. Don't worry about having the perfect manual. Focus on a few priorities. Pick 3 that are most needed or wanted and focus there. Start writing some steps and then add to your manual as you have time, as it fits within your program, as it fits within your priority. Don't feel you have to write an entire manual all at once. So the manual, here's a list of some examples for what to include within the prospect management manual. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but it's a starting point for conversation and for brainstorming within your team. Again, I will always say it gets back to what your team needs, but some of the basic ideas of what to include in a prospect management manual: how to make a research request, how to perform the research, tools and resources to use. We're going to dive in a little bit deeper, talking about the stages and ages and actions, as well as levels of research. Can talk about the formation of a moves management meeting. When I write the procedures for a moves management meeting, it actually starts weeks prior to the actual day of the meeting. And the procedures involve reminders. It involves how to run the queries. It involves who is involved in running the queries, sending out the reminders, how meetings are placed on calendars, down to the follow-up from the meetings and who is entering in actions post-meeting. How are those post-meeting items updated and then the team alerted? And in the heart of the meeting that we all talk about, what is required for an action? What are the pieces of information that are needed? How does the meeting proceed? What is the length of time of the meeting? All of those details can be included. Again, so that you don't feel overwhelmed. It's okay if that seems like too much detail for you right now. Put a start, a middle, and an end, and go from there. Build out the details of your procedures as it meets your capacity within your team. Other things that we can look at for the prospect management: what to do when you have a first-time donor. Do you research them? Do you enter their name into DonorSearch and run a quick report? Do you have a qualification call or visit? Looking at the research, the confidentiality of the research and the storage, so important. We're going to talk a little bit more later on about prospect management calendars, and in and of themselves, as well as incorporating them into the fundraising calendar so that we can review the manual, looking at data integrity, so how we enter the data into the database, queries and screenings, and then foundation and corporate research. All of these are pieces of manuals that I have created, and they're not a comprehensive list, but they are a good starting point if you're looking at how do I get started with creating my manual. Now, we are going to go, one of those items on the prospect manual is the research request. So I picked out a few to talk about a little bit more in depth with everyone here. And I picked out some that are a little bit more basic and simple, and some that are going to have a little bit more detail and meat to them. And I wanted to use these as examples so that we could talk through and see how some basic premise can be used for both basic procedures and policies around something like a research request, as well as around how prospects are aged in stages and how research levels are produced for requests and for the levels of prospects that the relationship managers are meeting with. For all of the policies and procedures, there is a basic premise that I use in order to develop them. And it was on the very first slide. It's the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And if you take nothing else away from this conversation today, please pause and think about or write down or type into your phone who, what, when, where, why, and how. For every single policy or procedure that we want to create, we want to be able to answer these questions and use them as the basic framework for whether it is the policies and those overarching themes or the procedures and the step-by-step instructions. With the research request, this falls, we can look at it as both a policy and a procedure, and look at within the policies of who is capable of making a research request. What can they ask for? Are we saying the who, back to who can do it? Is it the relationship managers? Is it a gift officer? Can we have major gift as well as annual fund requests? Can a regional director request research from the central office? The who is important. The what can they request? What level of research? What types of details? Does your team require that the relationship managers or frontline gift officers perform a certain level of research themselves? Or is all research produced through one central office? When can they request the research? How much time is needed to be for the request to be asked for prior to a meeting? What is the time needed to put that request into a queue for the research team? How much time should be expected of the research team in order to fulfill the request as well? How much depth should be expected for them to perform? Where would the research request be submitted? How and why? So we want to set the stage by having those questions and answering all of the questions, both for the policies and for the procedures. So what does this look like? Let's say you're a hybrid employee and you're a researcher, and it happens to be a day that you're sitting in the office and you're sitting at your desk, and a relationship manager also happens to be in the office, and they come walking by and they knock on your door and they say, "Hey, Kelley, I just got off the phone with one of our board members who said that I really need to try and get a meeting with one of their business partners. I don't know enough about them to feel comfortable to make that call. Can you please create a level 2 profile for me? And I need it by tomorrow. And then they go walking off. It's a common scenario, right? No harm is meant. There's, the best of intentions. They got this great opportunity. They're talking to a board member. They want to, grab the opportunity. They see you sitting there and they want to act on it. Wonderful. But then what happens if you're in the middle of doing some work? You're writing the note on a scrap of paper because you don't want to forget it. You know that it's a legitimate request, but then you forget. Or, the amount of time that they gave you did not allow for all of the other work that you have in your queue. So by simply setting up the structure of how much time is needed, how they request it, having a dashboard, having a system where all of the requests are put into a queue, it just makes so much ease of transaction, of accountability, and it allows everyone to see the steps that are being taken. So again, a simple idea with a research request, but using all of those questions, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Now, we go from a research request to another practical procedure for conducting prospect research. For those of you who are joining us today and are the researchers, I know I've had this happen myself. There's a request for research, and it's a pretty basic level request of research. And then there are some opportunities, and you start digging deeper, and then you start going even deeper because you know that there's going to be more information out there, but you just can't quite put your fingers on the actual resources. And you end up spending double the amount of time that you're expecting in order to get this research. Well, what happens then? It impacts the amount of work that you can get done that week. It impacts the queue. It might impact when the person the relationship manager that has requested the research is going to receive it. That's a good problem that shows a lot of interest and gung-ho. And we want to make sure that we are running as efficiently as possible. So we want to have procedures for how to perform the research, from what tools we're using. Again, if you're on a team where we have multiple members who are performing prospect research, we want to make sure that we have the tools across the board for everyone to use. We want to have a systematic approach. I have a couple of researchers who work with me, and I have created a system for them based on a level of research profile that is being produced and the research sites that we go to and the order of the research sites that we use. And we go from broad to very specific. Now, this list of research sites that we use, and one standard list that we use, is about 20 different research sources. It's not going to be comprehensive for every single prospect that we have and that we're researching. But the purpose of this is to minimize the steps and the actions, to streamline the procedure as much as possible, and to provide consistency between the research that I am doing as well as what the other researchers are performing, so that we can have continuity of process, continuity of product, and that we know that we are following the same steps to produce the research. And so we are providing a uniform product. Now, that's not to say that when one of us gets this creative idea and we say, wow, we found this new site, or wow, look at this other way to go about researching, we say, okay, let's investigate, let's look at it, let's change our procedure and add that in as a step or take out another step. So we want to be systematic, and by routinely following that procedure, you get practice, and you become more efficient. What's also key about that, and this is a real life example that just happened to me the other day. I was producing some research for an organization and I didn't follow my guideline. Yes, I am admitting that. I go off book sometimes. And here's what I saw. I was getting frustrated because I was, instead of following a straight line, I was kind of zigzagging all over the place with the research. And I sat there for a moment and I said, why is this feeling more challenging? Why am I not feeling like I'm getting through the process? And I said, Kelley, you're not following the protocol. You're not following the order of operations of the research sites. And as soon as I jumped back on track, everything went smoothly. Now, just because I have my order of operations and go from broader research tools to more specific, that doesn't mean that that's going to be the right order of operations and procedures for you and your team. What's important is that you practice, you have the conversation if there's more than one of you, and come up with a structure so that you can produce similar information. It also allows for an ease of jumping into and out of a product when you're working in a project. And so say you get pulled away for a meeting, or say it's the end of the workday and you'll finish up a profile the following day. In order to be able to keep track of where you are in the steps of those procedures for that research, you can look down and say, okay, I've gone through these first 10 sources. I know exactly where I need to pick up from. It helps, again, efficiency. It helps so much and just ease of mind. And so you don't miss out on a resource that has a tremendously important piece of data to include in the profile as well. Now, with all of this, the last piece on this slide is about buy-in from leadership. We want to make sure when we're creating these procedures that we have buy-in from the leadership. In this case, when we're talking about procedures for conducting effective and efficient prospect research, tools are important. Oftentimes, tools cost money. And so we have to get buy-in from the leadership for budget consideration. We have to get buy-in from the leadership for how deep we're diving, for what we are producing as far as research. So we want to have an open and frank conversation as the procedures and policies are being developed so that we can talk about, and again, it doesn't matter which position you hold within your team. Are you the leader? Are you the researcher? Are you a relationship manager? Are you all of the above? We want to have buy-in and open communication, because what might work for the researcher might not be what the relationship manager needs. And so coming together and hearing what one needs and what is functionally possible by the other, it allows you to create a procedure and policy that is going to have some middle ground for both of you and for the team. Okay, so if you recall back when on a previous slide, I said that we would dive deeper into stages and ages. And this is one of those areas that is more policy for organizations. Now, what I put up on the screen here is a general guideline for stages of a cultivation cycle for our for engagement for our prospects and donors. So we want to identify, cultivate the relationship, invite them to make a gift to support your programs, negotiate the terms of that gift, and how if there's signage, if there's terms that need to be met, and then stewardship to continue to engage the now donor, and engage them in a way that is meaningful to them and respectful, and keeps the organization at the forefront of their mind and makes them feel like an intimate part of the organization and the mission. Now, every organization is going to have slightly different stages. And this is important though. So one of the policies that I create with organizations takes this very simple diagram and pulls out for each stage different pieces of information in order to provide basis of conversation. So, for example, at the identification stage, we want to look at age, since we have age in the title here. How long do we want to say it's okay to have our prospects and donors in each of these stages? Again, every organization is going to be different, and not every stage is going to have the same length of time. For some, the identification stage could be 30 days. Cultivation could be a few months to a year. The invitation could be a few months. The negotiation might be a matter of weeks. Stewardship could be months to years, depending on the level of the gift. So we want to define an age, a length of time for a prospect to remain in each stage. We also want to describe what that stage is. What does it mean to our organization? So, for example, for identification, it might be identify, for those of you who use the term suspect, identify a suspect for further action and inclusion in portfolios. Some people put prospects or suspects at the identification stage in portfolios, some don't. That is something for you to define, but you describe what that stage is. And then you also identify milestones for that stage. So, for example, for the identification stage, confirm through data that the prospect is capable of making a major gift. So, if these are prospects that we're looking at who are major donor prospects, and our major donors, say, are $10,000 and above, who give $10,000 and above annually, we want to perform some sort of test to say, are they capable of that? Create a donor search report. And then the next thing that we want to do for that policy is have different actions that can take place. Now, this is really key within this particular policy. This tends to lean over more towards procedures, but this is part of the conversation for when we are talking about portfolio review. So we have these stages, we have them described, we have the amount of time that we want our prospects to be in them, we have milestones that are done in order to be met, and then some suggested actions. And I feel really strongly that we have suggested actions because it provides continuity between the relationship managers across the board. It also provides talking points for our relationship, for our prospect management team to be able to give some feedback to the relationship managers and say, hey, have you, tried this if there's been no movement? Or, oh, I need to provide, need to screen them for you. Or who's going to add a future action assigned to the gift officer. So having actions spelled out for each stage allows an ease of communication. Now, another piece of that, and we're going to talk about a little bit more on the next slide, is the levels of research. So for each of these stages, we have a description, milestone, actions, time in the stage, and what level of research is appropriate for a relationship manager to request to be produced on a prospect. This, again, helps to manage time expectations, efficiencies of work, and workload for you. One last piece that I like to include when I am spelling out and defining each of these stages is what percentage of the portfolio of the relationship managers or gift officers portfolio should be ideally made up of prospects who are in the cultivation or invitation or negotiation or stewardship stage, because we want to have a balance for the gift officers to help them be successful as well. So all of these details from this very, very simple graphic here, each one of these bubbles has a description, milestones, actions, levels of research, time and stages, and percentage of portfolio as part of each one of those bubbles. Now, as I mentioned on the last slide, we talked about levels of research being able to be requested for each stage. So again, this is a policy document that I like to create with the organizations that I work with. And so what we do is we look at what levels of research are used, what are the types of research that are created within the organization. So I just created some examples here. An organization might create an event bio, have a validation, a snapshot, a basic profile, and an in-depth profile. The actual levels of research and the actual names of these are less important for these examples. What's important is that for every single level of research that you produce and provide for your team, you want to define what stage the prospects are in order to request that level of research, how much time it takes for your team to produce the research. Again, it provides an accountability for yourself if you're the one who's performing the research, and it provides realistic expectations for the person who is requesting the research. So if they are asking, for example, and for an in-depth profile because they have a major donor who they are interested in engaging at a transformational level, it makes sense that they would request an in-depth profile. But it might not make sense that you would be able to provide them that profile in 48 hours if they don't know what else you have going on, and if the person requesting it doesn't realize that it actually takes 6 or 7 hours to produce this in-depth profile. And there also has to be that consideration of, does the reason that we have the production time in the stages is, does it make fiduciary sense for a member of your team to spend 6 or 7 hours on creating an in-depth profile for a prospect who would be making a charitable contribution? Possibly, they've no proven history of making a contribution to your organization at all at $1,000 level. You have to weigh the options between your staff time, the benefit to your organization, and what that gift will mean to the organization, and how you're engaging with that prospect. Also, when you're creating this chart for your policies, as far as the levels of research and defining the stage production time, you also want to define what the contents are within that level of research so that the person requesting it knows exactly what they might be getting. And you want to define the format of the research. And this might seem pretty simple and basic, but if somebody is expecting some bullet points and you are providing them a paragraph of information and they wanted bullet points because they're going to be looking at the material on their phone on their way to a meeting, it doesn't lead to efficiencies. What if they know that they're going to be receiving paragraphs of information, and that's okay, then they can make the decision whether they want that or whether they want to convert that to a couple of bullet points that are going to be meaningful to them during their conversation. Now, another thing that you might find useful to define is triggers for proactive research. I know it is so common. We all get stuck in the reactive research, and we want to be better stewards for the organization and do more proactive research. And it just seems like the challenge of time. Well, if you have a policy for saying, when this happens, I am going to perform research, you don't have to think about it. The decision is out of your hands and you just do. So, for example, you might have a trigger for proactive research that says whenever a new donor of $500 or more makes a gift to your organization, you automatically create a snapshot. Now, just an example there. But when you say, what is the trigger and what is the result, then you do the procedure in order to follow the policy. You are simply defining and you are taking that thought out of the process. Okay, now what that looks like. So a simple version of the chart of defining each of those levels of research and what the contents are and the production time and all of that. One simple variation of that is to say, okay, we have validation snapshots, basic profiles, and full profiles or in-depth. And across the top of this chart are different stages: identification stage, cultivation stage, invitation, negotiation, and stewardship. And I just put X's in to say, if someone is in a cultivation stage, you could make a validation snapshot, basic profile, or full profile request of the researcher. But you'll notice that there's asterisks at the basic and the full. And I put in there a caveat of you can, but there has to be a certain gift threshold that is met. And this is just an example of ways that you can put parameters around, create a policy around when someone can make a request. So again, we're pulling together some of the different pieces of the work here. We're saying, okay, there's research requests coming in. We have levels of research. We have stages and ages. And now we're saying, here's some options in order to meet all of our needs. And this is just one simple chart that you can lay out and spell out for your team. What it does is it gives everybody information to say, this is what I want, this is what I need. I can ask for a validation because I'm going to go meet this person for the first time, and I need to see if they really have proven capacity, if they've ever shown interest in making a gift of this level before. Or if you know that there is a significant gift opportunity and you're really looking at ways to engage them for a transformational level gift, it might be appropriate to do a full profile. Okay. So now we're going to switch gears and just talk a little bit about data protection and privacy and handling sensitive information. And I am not going to sit here and tell you that I have every single answer known to man with this. What I will say is that data protection is real, data privacy is important, and making policies as far as who has access to the database, where your research is stored, who can make changes within your database, what does the transfer of information look like, whether internally in staff or between the staff members and board members. Again, these are policies that you're going to want to spell out. Again, going back to the basics of saying who, what, when, where, why, how, and answering each of those questions when you get to a topic when we're talking about data protection and data privacy, and making sure that we respect donors, that we respect their private information, and analyze what is needed to be stored in the database and what isn't. Who should have access to the information and how that information is shared across channels. Now, I want to touch on, and as I had mentioned, I've been talking here for a while, and we're closing in on the hour already, and I have a couple more slides here, and I want to leave some time for any questions that you might have. But a couple of things that I think are really important. The review cycle. As I had mentioned early on in this presentation, it's really important to have policies that are overarching and are in line with the values of the organization. And they need to be able to change with the growing needs of the organization and the changing needs. So, what are some of the reasons that you might want to change either the procedures or the policies? Maybe you have access to new tools or different tools in order to perform the research. Maybe there's new staff. Maybe you have, as I had mentioned earlier, if there's a new idea for how to perform the research or what level of research to produce. Um, and also new needs. Maybe you have a new program that's being developed. Maybe you're going more from bricks and mortar and coming out of a capital campaign to making a shift and looking at endowment or regional gift officer needs. Could be all sorts of reasons. All of them are valid, and all of them say we need to make sure that there is a review cycle in place to we want to take time away out of our workday, out of producing the research, out of reviewing the portfolios, and say we want to read through these policies and procedures and make sure that they're still current and accurate. And we want to do that periodically. I recommend at least once a year to read through everything and see if anything needs to be updated. Oftentimes, only minor tweaks need to be made. Um, and how do we incorporate that into the rest of the program? So fitting it into the fundraising puzzle, and I'm not sure how easy this is to see, but this is an example that I created with one organization, and it's just 1 month. And what we did is we created a calendar, and we said for their very simple program, we said, okay, what are the pieces of actions that they need to perform each month? And so this is the month of January. And, we looked at board engagement and major gifts and annual giving foundations, corporations. And the very last bottom section here is operations. And you'll notice that in this operations month of January, there's a development plan review, standard operating procedures review for updating, which is part of what we're talking about. There's an audit report and a CRM updating. So what we want to do is we want to schedule our review at least annually, and we want to fit it into the rest of the tasks that are taking place within our program so that all the pieces of the puzzle, because they all need to click together and work together. And what I recommend is taking a approach like this for every single month of the year. Now, the road to success. We need robust policies and procedures. They contribute to successful fundraising. The more efficient we can be, the more focused we can have our time to reach out to our donors. We can build meaningful engagements with them and really build a partnership that is going to be beneficial to the organization and impactful to the individual donors as well. So one example of this, and I'm going to go back to my fundraising days. I was a plan giving director for an organization, and I created a simple procedure of sending out a notice for plan giving to our constituents every 3 months. In the course, and I created a structure, I followed it to the T, and in the course of 1 year, and this was a very young organization, it was only a handful of years old. Over the course of 1 year, I had $1 million of plan gifts identified simply by following the steps, following the procedures, and following up with the donors. So it was a win for the organization. It was a win for the structure, and it helped the organization be able to put some identified numbers into place. So that is just one example of of how procedure can help lead the organization to success. So I really appreciate the time that everybody has stayed on this webinar. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
There certainly are. Thank you so much, Kelley. Really do appreciate that. And just for those who may be more listening to this than watching this, would you mind repeating again how people can reach you?
Sure, absolutely. I can be reached at my website at conduitpartner.com, or I can be reached on LinkedIn under Kelley McGeehan or Conduit Partner.
And we do have some questions here, which I'm going to share with everybody. So if you have a question and you haven't posted it yet, please do that now. I think we have a few minutes to do that. Before I jump into them, since this is our only session this week and tomorrow is Juneteenth, which our sponsor DonorSearch is of course observing. We have a couple things that you can enjoy if you're in the mood for a little more of this series later on in the week. One is that we have on the podcast something which is very special. It's a conversation with Paul Clolery, who's the editor-in-chief of the Nonprofit Times, talking about his own journalistic journey and, in fact, the story that they recently uncovered after 2 years of work, which is probably the biggest scandal in the nonprofit sector. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm just going to tell you, you probably haven't read about it in the New York Times or the Washington Post for reasons I don't understand, but you can read about it in the Nonprofit Times, or you can hear all about it in the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast. So if you have an appetite for listening to these stories, do check that out. We'll also put on your calendar next week. It's the unveiling of the new Giving USA results. So for people with an appetite for data, like the kind that Kelley, of course, has been sharing how to think about data and utilize data, I know you appreciate Giving USA. It's the biggest, one of the biggest pillar stories of the year. There's some content I cannot share with you now, but I've been given a little window on it. I can tell you, you do not want to miss this because there have been some big shifts in who's giving and how much. And you can learn all about that. Next Tuesday, we have Josh Burkholz, who's the chairman of the Giving USA Foundation, Nathan Chappell, who of course is a friend of the series and the author of The Generosity Crisis, and Rashida Chalbris of the Chronicle of Philanthropy. Those are all the people who will be discussing that right here. That's on Tuesday at a different time, 11:30 a.m., as soon as those results are unembargoed. So now with that, let's get into the questions. So let's see. I know the first one came in from Anne. A couple of them came in early, and one was if you could share the agendas. And that may be referring to the very first slide that you have. So I'm going to just take the liberty of reading her second question in case the two are related. And that's, do you have forms or documents related to the research request?
So there are, and you know, I really recommend, again, this is where it gets into, it's a personal for your organization and what meets the needs of the organization. I have used with some organizations, we literally go old school and have a paper form that the team can fill out either in writing or electronically on their screen. And then there are some that are dashboards, and you can make it as simple or as complex as you want.
So of course, people can get in contact with you for some of that. And we did have people ask about these slides. So these are going to be shared with you as well. Please watch for an email. If you don't see it come to you in the next 24 to 48 hours, check your spam filter, or you can always reach out to me and I'll be happy to make sure you get that. Or of course, you can reach out to the author herself, Kelley, right here. We do have a question also from, let me see, from Jessica, who had asked about tips for onboarding team members to ensure that they follow these procedures.
So and this is where having the procedures written out in advance is so helpful. What I recommend, and I just onboarded somebody recently, so I've been going through this. I find that especially with prospect research, it's so hard because every situation is different. Every prospect is different. How you go about identifying whether they're an attorney or a doctor or an investment manager. But if you have these simple steps that you follow for performing research and you walk through them with your new team member and identifying, so you have everything written out, you show them the template, and I even take a template for a research profile and I write in a different color font, a different color lettering, and just saying, this is the type of information that would go into each of these sections. Keep that as a model, walk through these steps with them with every single research tool down to passwords and logins and how to get on each step. And then after they perform the research, review it with them. That is so important so that they can learn. One thing that I had neglected to mention earlier, in creating these policies and procedures, it can get a little overwhelming to be taking screenshots as you are working. AI has been phenomenal. You can download one of the apps to like a scribe to, as you're going through the process, it will capture each step for you, and then you can add in some notes. And I have found that to be really helpful for the work.
Absolutely. Such a great use of AI. We did have a question from Stacy earlier, just asking us as we're doing this recording if it will be shared. And once again, like the slides, you'll be receiving an email with a link to the recording. But if you'd like to see recordings of this session or other sessions, or maybe share them with colleagues who would benefit from this conversation and couldn't be present, all of that is available again at DonorSearch.net under the resources tab, or at the DonorSearch YouTube channel. So take a look in those places afterwards, but be on the lookout for that email. We did have a note here from Kendra, who had asked, do you have resources or suggestions for corporate prospecting and acquisition?
So it depends. It really depends on if you're looking for local and regional corporations, if you're looking for national. We could have a whole conversation about that. Foundation directory, donor search is actually great when you're looking for, you can enter in the name of a corporation and where they've donated to. You can look at listings of other nonprofit organizations and filter out by corporate donors. That can be helpful. But so I would say first and foremost, go to donor search, and then we can have a whole longer conversation about that.
We don't do nearly enough about corporate and foundation research, and in part because, of course, you focus and I focused a lot on individuals for all the right reasons. We're going to be talking about that again next week in the Giving USA results. But there are times when that shifts a little bit about the institutional and the individual relationship. So we'll make an effort, Kendra and others here, to do more on the corporate and foundation front in the future. One thing that DonorSearch can't help you with, as far as I know, is Ellen's question about where can we get our CFRE credit form. I think you actually have to get that from CFRE. If you have any difficulty with that, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me at, that's Jay, at DonorSearch.net, or you can find me also on LinkedIn. And Kelley, unless there are other questions in the room, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, as you've been drafting these policies and procedures over time, have you seen some shifts in what is relatively important? You just mentioned, for example, use of AI to use a tool like Scribe. So how have you seen some of these things shift? And has that in fact increased the importance of having a set of policies and procedures that you can get people to kind of gather around?
It really has shifted. And in fact, one of the most basic ways that it has shifted is away from paper documentation to having electronic files for everything. And having, and how research is sourced and cited. So, and again, this varies from organization to organization, but having the URLs, having the types of sources for the information, that has shifted. Being able to, there's so much more information access now that you can gather more information, and looking at due diligence, uh, and any type of threats to the organization as far as relationships go and risk assessments, that has become more of a priority for a lot of organizations. And so shifting how we look at those, what is deemed a risk, what is not, and how do we identify them? And again, using AI in order to go and search out opportunities or threats, or risks, has really changed the landscape quite a bit.
Right. And in fact, there's another fundraising.ai conference, I think, coming up, where hopefully some of that will be addressed. But for those who are both within, steeped in development like you are in fundraising, but also have that really specific lens and knowledge about prospect research and prospect development, I hope that we'll be a part of that conversation, because it's so important that we not be left out of that when we are kind of the repository of knowledge and information about the donors that matter so much to us. Thank you so much for all of this, Kelley. Again, really, really great information. I know that everybody clearly is appreciating this. If you all want to give a little wave or a thank you, I'm sure that Kelley would appreciate that. But you can also just send her a note, either on LinkedIn or via email or by visiting her site, to let her know what you think about her work. I'm sure you appreciate it at least as much as I do. Thank you so much, Kelley. And I do want to thank all of you for hanging out today with us. Again, our one session of the week. So do check out some of the other content we have for you over at DonorSearch.net. Make sure you sign up for what happens next Tuesday at 11:30 in the morning. It's really some surprising information. And I hope we'll see you there. But in the meantime, have a wonderful week. Enjoy the observation tomorrow of Juneteenth, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Till then, take care. Thank you, Kelley.